A short drive west from Denver lies a small city that was once known as the richest square mile on Earth.
I'm Mark Graves. We're at the Hidee Gold Mine in Central City, Colorado. This area is actually nicknamed the richest square mile on Earth because of all the rich gold ore that was mined out of here.
Central City boomed during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. Over 10,000 prospectors populated the city as early as 1860.
The Hidee mine claim was not discovered until 1896, which is fairly late for this area. Central City actually got started in 1859. There's one mine right next to us. It's called the Pittsburgh Mine, which was one of the largest producers in this area. It started, we're not sure the exact date, somewhere in the 1870s, we believe. There's another mine just next to the Pittsburgh called the Nottoway Mine, which does actually go back to the real early days of the early 1860s. The Pittsburgh actually was even producing a little bit into the 1970s.
You've probably seen pictures of men with pickaxes digging in dark mines or prospectors panning for gold in a mountain stream. But what exactly is the process for finding and extracting gold from a mine?
When they first started mining in this area, they were up near the surface where the rock has been weathered over millions and millions of years. It gets oxidized, exposed to air and water, and the ore, which this is a sample of, is actually called oxide ore. It's kind of a rusty orange color because there's a lot of iron in it, and the iron rusts out and gives it that coloring. Well, there's also lots of gold in there as well. So when the iron rusts away, it leaves the gold particles behind.
Early miners realized that if they crushed this oxide ore into tiny pieces, they could separate out the gold.
Gold is heavier than anything else, so when you see people gold panning, they're doing the same thing, letting the heavier particles settle out at the bottom and discarding the waste rock, keeping the gold. Toward the mid-1860s, they started getting down deeper on the veins, getting down to where the ore has not been oxidized. This is a sample of it here. This is actually called sulfide ore at this point because what you're seeing there, the sparkly pretty stuff, is pyrite. And pyrite its main components are sulfur and iron. When it weathers, after millions of years, would eventually look like that. But when they began mining the sulfide ore, the pyrite was still bonded with the gold. The gold actually was chemically combined with that pyrite. So no matter how fine they would crush that up, it would still be gold and pyrite mixed together, and they could not separate the gold out through the gravitational methods that they had used on the oxide ore.
In the mid-1860s, Nathaniel Hill came to Central City with the knowledge of being able to separate the gold from the pyrite.
He built a smelter, which is the process, smelting is what it's called. When you crush this the sulfide ore, you can heat it up to several thousand degrees, and then that will separate the gold out.
Separating the gold out was only part of the process. The most dangerous part was extracting the ore itself.
In order to break up solid rock, you need to blast it loose. So the process for that would be to drill holes into the rock, 3-4 feet deep, load each hole with dynamite, and blast that rock loose. Back in the 1800s, before they had fancy power tools, they would do it by hand, hammer and chisel. By the 1890s or so, they had come out with these jackleg drills, which run on compressed air. The problem, though, for the miners was that these jackleg drills, being so much more powerful, kicked up a lot of dust. So if you're back in a mine where there's not much ventilation, breathing rock dust all day long, you develop what's called silicosis. Dust gets in your lungs and you die pretty quickly. They actually nicknamed the drills Widowmakers because of that. In the 1890s, they did discover or figure out that if they added water to that, made this drill steel hollow so that they could pump water all the way through into the hole as they're drilling, they could cut the dust down. quickly became standard to do it that way.
Mining hundreds of feet into the darkened earth made visibility a challenge, especially in the 1860s. Most of the lighting was done by candlelight.
So this is what's called a miner's candlestick. They could stick their candle in that little holder, little hook to hang it on things. Not exactly a very bright light source, so it was pretty hard to see back in here, just with a candle or two to light your way.
By the turn of the century, miners started using carbide lamps.
A chemical process of combining water with calcium carbide forms acetylene gas. You'd put your carbide down in this bottom part, put water up on the top part here, so the water would slowly drip down onto the carbide. So that gas would come out of this little nozzle right here. So you'd flick that, make a spark, ignite the gas, you'd have a nice bright little flame.
Carbide lamps were a big improvement over candlelight, although the gas posed a dangerous risk in the mine, especially flammable ones like coal mines.
By the 1920s or so, batteries had been perfected to the point that they were cheap enough and reliable enough to use in underground mining. This one right here is kind of the standard rechargeable lead acid battery pack. Even today, miners would wear something like that.
After what could be days of blasting through the solid rock of the mountain, the mining team exposes the vein, a mineral-rich streak that contains precious metals.
This is the vein itself right here. We're down deep enough now that we're into that sulfide ore. This has been prevented from being exposed to air and water for millions and millions of years until we broke it open not more than 30 years ago. So it hasn't had a chance to oxidize much at all. You're still seeing nice pure sulfide ore. The sparkly part that you see here, about foot and a half wide, that's the heart of the vein. They would call that the pay streak, where the richest ore is. But the actual vein itself is more like 5 or 6 feet wide. You look over this way, you see little bits of the ore kind of mixed into the country rock here. The miners, if you're going after gold, you would take out that entire vein 5-6 feet wide.
One of the best parts about the Hidee mine is that tourists are encouraged to become part of the mining process.
Right now we've come down as far along the vein as we've blasted. We're about 25 feet below the level that we walked in on. So we're actually now about 160 feet below the surface. So this is where we have hammers and chisels. Every tourist that comes in here who wants to is welcome to chip out a little chunk of ore to take home as a souvenir. So the best strategy is to find a chunk that's sticking out where you can get your chisel kind of behind it. And then as you hit that, you can actually break loose a nice chunk of ore. So that's freshly chipped right off the vein. Nice good sulfide ore. That stuff, because it's right out of the heart of the vein, that would probably be on the upper limit of our assay values. Could be as high as 8 or 10 ounces of gold per ton of this. And of course, it makes a good specimen to put on your display shelf as well.